Years ago, in another life, I woke to look out the smeared window of a Greyhound bus I had been riding all night. We were traveling through the countryside on a long 2-lane highway, and the night was pitch dark, except for a red pinprick of light near the horizon. The light shone like a match struck in a basement, or the glint off an animal's eyes as it circles a campfire. Several passengers from the opposite side of the bus had gathered around and were looking out at the light. One of them, a large, older man smelling of body odor and cologne, had placed his hand on my headrest and was leaning over my seat to get a better view. As our bus drove closer, we saw that it was firelight. We were still at some distance, but the dimensions of a large building, all ablaze, could just be made out. A plume of black smoke billowed up from the fire and dissolved into the dark of the night sky. The passengers were talking amongst themselves in a hushed tone. "It must be a barn," one of them said. "I've never seen a fire so big," said another. "Do you hear any sirens? It could be an hour to the nearest town." "We should stop and see," said the man standing over my seat. His voice was deep and gravelly with a smoker's crackle. It was naturally loud, the voice of someone who is incapable of whispering. The others looked amongst themselves, silently conferring. "The authorities will be here soon enough," said a man in a sleek, rumpled business suit. After that, the passengers grew quiet and they all returned to their seats except the man standing above me. I could sense his grip tightening on my headrest as he looked steadfastly at the fire. We were drawing nearer to the blaze. Finally, the man released his grip and walked down the aisle toward the front of the bus, steadying himself off the overhead luggage compartments. As he reached out his arms, I saw that they were covered in a thick mat of gray hair. His back was stooped slightly with age, but he still appeared solid and strong. He reminded me of my grandfather, who continued to work as a cement mason into his 70s, body all sinew and gristle, hardened by years of physical labor. When the man reached the front of the bus, he spoke to the driver. "I think we should stop. I can hop out for a minute and make sure everything's all right." "We can't stop," the bus driver replied without bothering to look up. "It'll just take a minute," the man continued. "I'll check to make sure nobody's hurt." "I told you we can't stop. Sit down." There was a steely tone in the driver's voice that seemed to seal his statement from any further debate. "It's not like we can do anything. Leave it to the fire department," the man in the suit said in an agitated tone. The old man turned to look at us, his fellow passengers, and what he saw did not encourage him. We buried our eyes in our phones, or strapped on our sleep masks, or forced ourselves to look out at the black landscape rushing by. I saw a glint of panic in the man's eyes, the look of a cornered animal. Probably when he was younger, he would have reacted differently. He would have found some way to force the bus driver to pull over, or at least he would have put the man in the suit in his place. But he was older now, and his instincts were not as sure as they used to be. I sat with my cheeks burning and my teeth clenched. It seemed like the old man was looking only at me. I wanted to stand up and defend him. I wanted to proclaim to the cabin that he was right. How could we drive past a fire like that? But I said nothing. I bored into my seat like a drill into the earth. The old man's face grew slack. After a minute, he walked back down the aisle to his seat, and somehow he seemed smaller as he passed. The bus was quiet for a time. As the sun rose, people began to chatter amongst themselves again. We arrived 15 minutes ahead of schedule, and my sister was waiting for me at the station. I saw the other passengers hug their families and climb into their cars and drive off. The old man shuffled across the street to the city bus stop. We all returned to our lives without knowing whether anyone had lived or died, whether anyone's life had been changed irrevocably that night as we drove past, refusing to bear witness. Later that night, I woke in a sweat. I remembered the bus ride so vividly it was as if I was still there. I saw the fire blazing bright and violent, impossibly red. I saw the old man argue with the driver and then turn to us, and I willed myself through time to stand up. Stand up. but the memory was the same. It burned within me.
Artificial things. Pneumonia, Vic said. I mean, who dies of pneumonia anymore? He began to cough and cry at the same time. My mother had beaten back a lot worse, cancer and everything. Molly watched Vic walk himself back and forth in the hospital room. What happened? He said. 3 days ago, she wasn't that bad. His cheeks shone with tears. Molly looked at Rosie lying on the bed between them, the room now absent of whirring and clicking. What do doctors know? He said. Vic. Molly couldn't stop looking at Rosie's face. Her mother-in-law's dark lashes stood out against her still flushed cheeks. 19 years they had known each other. Molly remembered the photograph of a young Rosie with thick black hair striding confidently toward the camera. 1952, the year she had started at Bamberger's in Newark, a thriving city then. But it was really Rosie's mouth, her lips, that wouldn't let Molly look away. They curved now, almost into a smile, as if she were about to laugh, or have Molly bend over to listen to a joke. This was not the way the dead were supposed to look. Vic softly touched his mother's forehead and neck. She looked so sad. Molly didn't know what to say. The ICU door swung open and a big woman entered, noisily rolling a gray trash can behind her. She stopped short when she saw the three of them. Oh, pardon me. They said you were gone. Vic wiped his palms on his t-shirt. Please, come in. It's fine. The woman kept her eyes down and busied herself cleaning. She threw away Rosie's blue plastic water pitcher, drinking glass, and soap dish. None of these things had ever been used. The woman swung the meal tray over and wiped it down. Could I give you a hand packing up? She asked quietly. Vic shook his head at the same time Molly said, That would be nice. Vic, why don't you go? Why don't you go? Get some sleep. I should call Dudley Hoffman about the arrangements. He patted out in the two big hospital slippers a nurse had given. The two women gathered up the belongings scattered across the room. Vic's shirt lay wadded under the bed. One of the black shoes he had forgotten nearby. Crumpled issues of the New York Times sat on the extra chair. In the top cabinet drawer, Molly discovered Rosie's false teeth, her big pink-framed glasses, and a hairbrush filled with champagne blonde hair, all neatly arranged. They looked lonely, waiting for Rosie's body. It took Molly a long time to pick up the first object. She opened the narrow hospital closet door and took out the tulip-covered bag she had brought to the emergency room just 4 days before. At the bottom still lay the red cable-knit sweater she had grabbed after her mother-in-law called to say she was being admitted. Molly remembered randomly pulling out clothes from Rosie's crammed bureau, stuffing anything that she touched into the flowered bag. Price tags were still attached to much of the clothing. Rosie loved to shop. Bamberger's, which turned into Macy's, any department store. She bought clothes she never wore, sending some of the things across the country to Molly, who never wore them either. In the hospital closet now hung a royal blue warm-up suit, slacks, 4-striped t-shirts, and a green chenille robe. 2 pairs of white walking shoes filled the closet floor. Bring them both, Rosie said. You never know. They had laughed. Now the plastic bag marked patient belongings in big black letters was half full too. Molly heard Rosie's voice in her head. No, shoes go on the bottom. Take the washcloth. Never know when you need an extra. Tuck the t-shirt over the top. See? Molly held up Rosie's red sweater to her face. It smelled of Chanel No. 5 and peppermints. Her eyes filled with tears. The woman was still cleaning. She was born here in New Jersey, Molly said. Cherry Hill. The woman nodded. Cherry Hill's nice. She was going to move out to San Francisco and live near us. San Francisco's nice too, I hear. The woman stopped at the foot of the bed. I don't suppose you want this. She held out a white case the size of her palm. Inside was Rosie's prosthesis. My artificial breast, she called it. Though Rosie hated the thing, she had worn it until the last day. Oh, might as well. Molly took the case, clicking it open and shutting it. I think that's about everything, the woman said, glancing around the vacant-looking room. I'm very sorry for your loss. Thank you. Molly realized people would say things to her like that now. Her legs felt hollow. Do you think it'd be all right if I go too? Molly asked. No reason to stay unless you want to, the woman said. Sometimes it takes hours for them to come get the body. Molly looked at Rosie's face one more time, feeling too many things and nothing at all. She found herself walking to the third-floor rooftop garden instead of toward the hospital elevators. She had noticed the flowery place through a corridor window last night. Now Molly stood outside in the cool sunshine, a bag pulling on each arm. She heard bursts of steam and children's laughter coming from somewhere. The unfamiliar streets crossed at right angles. She had forgotten how flat New Jersey was. She walked past the planters of bright orange marigolds and white impatiens to the far side of the garden. She sat on a cold bench, setting Rosie's belongings beside her. Through the white pine trees, she could just make out a patch of pale grass in the park beyond the hospital's walls. She caught sight of a girl kicking a soccer ball, an older boy pumping himself higher and higher in the swing. His feet seemed to touch the green branches. Molly stood up, reached into the bag, and pulled out the white case. The shiny pink mask balanced easily in one hand. She flung the thing high in the air. It sailed in a white arc before landing softly on the top of a pine tree. It fell a few feet, then caught on a sturdy branch. A crow flew up. I don't know where you're going, but I know you won't be needing this, Molly said out loud. She sent a striped t-shirt flying next. Then the blue pants. It felt better than she had expected. A white sneaker shot into the air. She couldn't see where any of these things landed. Rosie's green robe floated.